In February 2024, Canadians experienced a temporary win with the delay of medical assistance in dying for those whose sole underlying condition is a mental health issue. Thank you to you, our 100 Huntley Street family, as hundreds of you took action and contacted your members of Parliament to help protect the most vulnerable in our society. Joining me now for an important update on the critical moral issue of euthanasia in Canada is Derek Ross, Executive Director and General Counsel of Christian Legal Fellowship. Thank you for being with us today again, Derek.
Thank you, Lara.
Well, Derek, you joined us for our 1 hour special earlier last year, and many of our viewers, to get a briefing on what we're talking about here, could go to our website, 100huntley.com, to take a look at that 1 hour special. You brought so much information and shed so much light on this issue, historically what's happening in Canada connected to M.A.i.D and euthanasia. So for our viewers tuning in right now, we want them to watch that 1 hour special, but we also want to just give them some of the basics right now. Tell us a bit about the history of M.A.i.D in Canada, where we were and where we're going.
For sure. So when we talk about medical assistance in dying, it's important for people to know what we're talking about. We're talking about the intentional termination of a person's life, typically through a lethal injection. That was a crime in Canada until 2016. And that changed as a result of a Supreme Court of Canada decision that led to new legislation. And at that time, the law allowed a very limited exception that would allow a physician to help end the life of a patient in what were supposed to be very strict circumstances, one of which was that the individual was at end of life, that their death was already reasonably foreseeable. But a few years later, that was also challenged by those who were advocating for broader access to euthanasia in Canada. And ultimately, they were successful in having the law changed and expanded so that it was no longer limited to the end-of-life context, but was available at any stage of life for those who are not dying, for those whose conditions would not even cause their death, provided they met the other criteria, including that they have what the law describes as a grievous and irremediable condition. So that law was expanded in 2021. And at that time, the law was also expanded to allow for euthanasia in cases of mental illness, but that was delayed for 2 years. It was delayed again. And most recently, thankfully, it was delayed yet again. So right now, the law does not allow medical assistance in dying for individuals whose sole underlying condition is a mental illness, but that is scheduled to come into effect in March of 2027.
So at this stage, the current government is planning to put this law into effect March 2027.
Exactly. Yeah, there's also been some recommendations from a parliamentary committee to further expand euthanasia for children who demonstrate requisite decision-making capacity is the term used, and also for individuals with dementia, so those that have lost capacity but have made a prior request. Now, those have not yet been expanded yet, but there have been recommendations for that to take effect as well. And so then you see potential combinations of those things, children with mental illness, potentially. Again, that's not currently the law, but those are the things that certain advocates are pushing for.
And Derek, you know, for children, that's someone 18 years old or younger. And we do know that, especially in this season of the world, there's such a prevalence and spike of mental health issues amongst our young people. You know, we talked about this in our 1 hour program on this topic, that even I had experiences when I was 17 years old with with mental health challenges where I was so depressed, I felt suicidal. And I think about if I'd been able to go into a doctor's office and had been counseled in that direction, and yet that was the exact time where God really took hold of my life. And things really changed for me. So really interesting to really process that. And as a parent of 2 teenage boys, would they be able to go to the doctor one day and actually pursue this path of doctor-assisted suicide? It's very terrifying. When you look at the global stage of those countries that practice medical assistance in dying and how they're practicing it compared to how Canada's practicing it, what are some of the opinions about our laws and how liberal they are?
Yeah, well, Canada is one of the most open, liberal euthanasia regimes in the world right now. And we're seeing that the numbers of individuals that have resorted to M.A.i.D in Canada have expanded a great number higher and faster than a lot of people were expecting. And one of the big concerns, and especially in the mental illness context, is that it is transforming our approach to medicine, because it is presenting death as a solution, a medical, choice-worthy, state-sponsored solution to suffering. And I think once we cross that line, we've fundamentally changed the way that we approach suffering. We view it as something to end not by ending suffering, but by ending the life of the person that is suffering. And so traditionally, especially in things like psychiatry, where the approach has always been to find ways of coping and treatment, helping people find hope and healing without ever resorting to death as the solution, that fundamentally changes. Another big concern in the mental health context is that a lot of experts feel very strongly that they can never predict with any reasonable certainty whether an individual's condition can be remediable or not. In other words, they can never say with certainty that someone is not going to recover or find healing or treatment. And so that's a huge concern, the idea that we would be presenting death as a solution and ending the lives of Canadians who may get better and may find hope and healing.
Indeed, and we see so many advocacy groups and associations representing mental health professionals, medical professionals, as well as disability rights groups saying this law is very dangerous if it is allowed to progress. Why is it, when you look at M.A.i.D being opened up to be allowed for those who have mental health challenges or disabilities, why is that such a giant risk? Why are these advocacy groups so concerned with even bringing forward lawsuits because they are so concerned about the situation?
For sure. Well, I think at its core, there's a concern that laws like this are inherently discriminatory. Now, that's not to say that those that are advocating for these laws are wanting or intentionally wanting to discriminate. I think a lot of people are pushing them forward out of a position of genuine empathy and sympathy, but we would argue that that's misplaced, because what the law is ultimately doing is drawing a line in the sand between individuals with disabilities and everybody else. Because for everybody else, we would say that we will always try to affirm you in your life and find ways to remove your suffering while affirming that your life is always worth living. For anyone with an irremediable and grievous medical condition, in other words, a disability that causes this, what the legislation calls intolerable suffering, we would say suffering associated with the disability, that's different from any other type of suffering. And for that type of suffering, we would say death is an appropriate answer, potentially. But the problem is that in practice, suffering associated with a disability has been interpreted very broadly. It's been interpreted to include things like social suffering, individuals feeling like they're a burden on their loved ones, anxiety, isolation, and loneliness. These are things that many people struggle with. Canadians with disabilities are not the only people who struggle with these things, and yet they are the only ones to whom the law will say death might be the appropriate solution to your suffering. And that is fundamentally, in our view, a discriminatory premise. And that's why we are very concerned about it, and many disability rights organizations are very concerned about it as well.
Well, I know Christian Legal Fellowship has been advocating around this issue and really trying to bring awareness to Canadians about the dangers of allowing M.A.i.D for those who have mental health issues or disabilities. One of the things that we see in a lot of the research is that people applying for M.A.i.D are often suffering, as you said, in social ways, as well as, so for example, unable to get good housing, unable to get health care, unable to get the treatments they need. And so we see that we're not meeting their needs. And as a result, many are moving into this idea that, well, maybe I should just end my life. And that's heartbreaking, because we are meant to help our neighbors and meet the needs of those who have challenges in every capacity. I mean, that's God's call on us as his children, made in his image. The number of people that have died as a result of M.A.i.D in Canada is staggering. It's over 40,000 people in just the short time since it's been legalized. And sometimes I talk to friends who are doctors or nurses, and they'll say to me, well, you know what? No one's going to make me do that. No one's going to make me help someone die by M.A.i.D. And actually, we're starting to see there are cases coming forward, legal cases, which Christian Legal Fellowship is tracking with, where we may be actually forced to administer M.A.i.D. if these cases actually are successful in what they're attempting to do.
So this is one of the big problems about presenting euthanasia as healthcare. Because once it's presented as a healthcare treatment option, it's seen as something that has to be not just integrated into the healthcare system, but embraced by it. And so there are a number of groups, for example, that argue that physicians have an obligation to introduce M.A.i.D. as a treatment option to any one of their patients they see who might be eligible. Well, with the eligibility framework expanding as quickly as it is, that could be a lot of patients. And we're hearing not just stories, reports of individuals that are attending healthcare facilities and hospitals seeking life-affirming treatment and being asked, have you considered M.A.i.D. as an option? And for them, that is a fundamentally, just an incredible affront to their dignity.
Yes.
That they're seeking support and they're being presented, again, it's coming from a well-meaning place potentially, but they're being asked, have you considered death as the answer? And so it's also being, as you mentioned, integrated in other ways where, for example, in Quebec, legislation has been introduced that says that all palliative care facilities must allow M.A.i.D. or euthanasia to take place and cannot object to its provision. And that has a lot of implications for faith-based palliative care homes, but other palliative care homes as well that would view euthanasia as fundamentally inconsistent with palliative care. That they exist to support people and journey with them through the final stages of their life, not to intentionally cause their death. And so there's litigation in Quebec dealing with that issue. And similarly, there's a lawsuit in British Columbia that is seeking to force the government to require Catholic hospitals to allow euthanasia to take place within the walls of their healthcare communities. And so that raises a lot of concerns as well, both from a freedom of medical conscience perspective, but also from the perspective of individuals who want the option to seek treatment potentially at a place that only will provide life-affirming care. In other words, we should allow spaces that are euthanasia-free, that individuals know that they can go there and the only care and support that they will be provided is life-affirming. And so we're concerned about denying Canadians that choice.
You think about enforcing Catholic hospitals to administer euthanasia or M.A.i.d. It actually goes against the theologies and principles of Catholic belief. It goes against the freedom of expression of our faith in who God is as people of faith. So many challenges here, and I'm so thankful Christian Legal Fellowship is pressing into these areas and continuing to track with Canadians on these issues. I see you're always tracking with what's unfolding and trying to educate us so that we understand. I did mention my doctor friends. Other friends I have in the medical system are so thankful those who are tracking with me, they're so thankful for what your organization is doing to try to bring light to it, to protect doctors and nurses, anyone who would feel that eventually they're going to have to take part in administering M.A.i.d. Now, Derek, just before we end our conversation, our viewers are probably wondering what they can do. If this law looks like it's going to take place or go forward again in March 2027, what would stop that? What can stop that?
Well, again, this is why it's beautiful that we live in a democracy and that we can all participate and have a say in what our laws require and impose and how they protect vulnerable and marginalized Canadians. And so every person has the right to contact their member of parliament and make their views known. For those also that have their own stories, I would encourage them to share their stories. Maybe individuals that at one point in their lives have struggled with suicidality, but have found meaning and hope and don't want to see someone like that in a moment of darkness to feel that death is their only solution and to be enabled to pursue that. Instead, they should be enabled to pursue life as a beautiful path forward. And so sharing those stories, and again, engaging with the work that organizations like Christian Legal Fellowship are doing. So would encourage people to check out our website, christianlegalfellowship.org. We'll provide updates on legislation, on cases that we're involved in, and to consider supporting our work so that we can continue to engage on all of these fronts.
Well, Derek, we're so thankful for the work that you are doing at Christian Legal Fellowship. We're so thankful you've joined us today. That 1 hour special made a difference in the lives of our viewers and Canadians. We're thankful you took part in it with us. And for these updates, we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks so much for the opportunity, Lara.
Please remember to put the issue of euthanasia in Canada on your prayer list and pray for vulnerable Canadians that they will be protected, their needs will be met for mental health support, healthcare, housing. Don't forget to contact your local MP and continue to support Christian Legal Fellowship as we journey with them on what we can do to protect the most vulnerable in our society. If you are being impacted by mental health challenges, disability challenges, or even euthanasia, we want to offer our prayer lines to you. Our prayer partners can offer you the hope of Jesus, encourage you in these dark moments, and remind you that God can move mountains no matter what situation we are in. Please call 1-866-273-4444.